Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Welcome to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, listen, the Biden administration has gone cray-cray. They're trying to invoke the 14th Amendment that had to do with birthright citizenship when it came to slaves. They're trying to invoke that in a specific part of the 14th Amendment when it comes to the debt ceiling debacle or raising the debt limit. Biden wants to be able to unilaterally, as the president, raise the debt limit himself, totally removing Congress from the picture. Remember, Congress represents us, the branch of government that is closest to the people. He should not be allowed to do that, especially using some fake and phony argument of the 14th Amendment, a part of the Constitution, by the way, which was simply Congress stating at the time that if Confederate soldiers or Southern members in Congress were to get into Congress at the time, they could not use Congress's money or your taxpayer dollars to pay off the debts of the South, the Confederate soldiers that were fighting for slavery. I mean, this guy is what the left is trying to do in order to take power from you and spend more of your money is absolutely crazy. We are having Zack Smith of the Heritage Foundation to come on and speak about this. He's a constitutional lawyer. He wrote a great column on this, breaking it down for the laymen so that we could all understand the debt ceiling limit, and this cray-cray notion that the Biden administration can invoke the 14th Amendment and literally take power from you and I when it comes to the power of the purse by circumventing Congress. No way, Jose. Ain't going to happen. I want you guys to stay tuned. Stay tuned for Zack Smith. Before we go to him, just real quickly, I want to tell you about my sponsor, My Pillow. My Pillow, Mike Lindell, and My Pillow is a patriot. Listen, guys, if you guys hate the CCP, make sure you support My Pillow, right? American jobs, American manufacturing. All you have to do is go to mypillow.com, enter the promo code Carl, and you'll get his latest offer. Buy one, get one free offer of the new My Pillow 2.0. It comes with the same patented adjustable feel as the original My Pillow, but now it has this temperature regulating thread surrounding the pillow. So now it's softer, smoother, and cooler. All his products come with a 60-day money-back guarantee, 10-year warranty, so you cannot beat that with a bat. Again, all you do, go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square at the top of the page, enter my name, Carl, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. You want to bring American jobs and American manufacturing back to U.S. shores? Hey, you can start by going to mypillow.com. Peruse the website. Use my name. There's discounts up to 66% off. Guys, stay tuned for some quick program messaging, and then we'll be right back with Zack Smith of the Heritage Foundation to break down everything you need to know about Joe Biden's debt ceiling crisis. All right, guys, and now I'm joined by my guest, Zack Smith. Zack Smith is a legal fellow in the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Basically, he's a constitutional lawyer. He's a frequent guest here at the Carl Jackson Show podcast because he offers excellent insight when it comes to all things law or constitutional law when I have questions. The latest thing, he wrote a fantastic column at the dailysignal.com that breaks down the debt ceiling or Biden's debt ceiling debacle, in my opinion. And I just wanted him to come on and I wanted him to break it down in layman's terms as best as possible. So Zack Smith, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Carl. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Really do appreciate your time. I really appreciate you breaking this down for us. As we said before we came on air here, Zack, I really, as best as possible, I know you're a constitutional lawyer. As you admitted, it's kind of hard for lawyers to speak in layman's terms, but just keep in mind that there are people not like me, Zack, not like me. Like, I'm brilliant, so not me, but people like my producer that may be listening. Just kidding. All right, but okay, so let's start here, Zack. The debt ceiling, I just want to define it for people. Basically, the debt ceiling is the maximum amount of money that Congress is allowed to borrow. Will you break that down for us just in layman's terms?
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to take a step back here, Carl, and kind of start from the beginning because basically, the Constitution places the power of the purse with Congress. It's not with the courts, it's not with the president. It's Congress that's responsible for essentially spending federal money. And the process that Congress uses to do that, it's really a three-part process. They have to authorize certain expenditures, say, we, the federal government, are going to spend money on XYZ. They have to then appropriate money for that purpose, and they have to make sure that the money is actually there for the government to spend. And the
Right.
way that that money is there are several ways, but essentially it's either through revenues coming in, like tax revenues coming in, or the government has to borrow money to cover the expenditures that it's authorized and appropriated for. Now, traditionally, historically, if you go back to the late 1700s, all throughout the 1800s, Congress would always, they would authorize money, they would appropriate money, and then they would authorize a specific debt issuance, maybe the selling of certain bonds, certain other assets to cover those specific authorized and appropriated expenditures. Now, in the early 20th century, the early 1900s, really around the time of World War I, Congress changed this process. They would still authorize and appropriate money, but instead of issuing specific debt to cover specific expenditures, they just authorized the Treasury Department. Congress authorized the Treasury Department, kind of gave them an aggregate limit they couldn't go above to cover all of these other expenses. And that's really how this debt limit idea started. And so they changed it a little bit in the 1930s, after the Great Depression leading up to World War II. But essentially, the debt limit is just the total amount of money that the government can borrow to cover the expenditures that Congress has authorized and appropriated money for. And so, the debt limit doesn't change the underlying obligations that the federal government has incurred.
Right.
All it implicates really is how the government is going to meet those obligations.
See, that's very fascinating, and you got into some of the history, which was actually towards the latter part of your column. I'll be in for the Officer Tatum on Thursday and Friday, so I'm actually going to be speaking about your column here, Zach. Maybe we can get you on his program if you have time to discuss this as well with the national audience in a little more detail here. But I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. It's simple. The debt ceiling issue is simple for me and for people to understand. I believe. But the Democrat Party are trying to, I'm very concerned of what the Democrat Party is trying to do, trying to allow Biden to unilaterally have the power to be able to increase our debt limit, essentially circumventing Congress. And when I speak in terms, for those of you in the listening audience, of circumventing Congress, that's bypassing you, the voter. So it's amazing to me that the government, they're spending so much money. They're spending more money than they take in from us, Zach, and then they're in a panic because they're
Right.
because they're not holding up holding up their end of the bargain. They're not fiscally responsible.
That's right. Well, and look, the government's spending more money than it takes in. Unfortunately, that's not anything new. It's really been supercharged in the last few years. And I think that's why many people are looking at the current amount of the federal debt and saying this is a big, big problem. It's not only going to saddle future generations with really unsustainable debt levels. In some sense, it's also a national security threat. It's an
Yeah.
economic threat. It's just something that needs to be dealt with. And so that's why many, the House Republicans, for instance, are saying in order to raise the debt limit to meet current obligations, we also have to pair that with future spending cuts. Now, that's a policy position. That's one that my colleagues at Heritage have written about extensively, why that makes good policy. But from a legal perspective, Carl, it's clearly, we have a process for changing the laws in our country. It's nothing, unusual. If you've seen Schoolhouse Rock, you know how the process works. The House and the Senate pass a bill, it goes to the president's desk, and he signs it, or he vetoes it, essentially. But in order for something to become law, it has to pass both houses of Congress and have the president's signature attached to it. And so to raise the debt limit, that's essentially what has to happen. And that's why there are so many negotiations happening right now.
Zach, let me. I want to go through your column in bits and pieces and just have you respond to literally your own writings. But I want to reemphasize here's or at least state here's why I'm very concerned about the debt ceiling at this point in time. And frankly, it's not the debt ceiling in and of itself. It is what the Democrat Party is trying to do. I really do believe that what we've seen with the banks that are collapsing, whether it's the Silicon Valley Bank, whether it's the first, I think, Republic Bank, where JP Morgan Chase was able to scoop them up for little to nothing with a no bid type contract. I think the federal government under the Biden administration, I think they want a centralized economy. I think they want a centralized bank. And I think they want literally, I think they want a king, Zach. I think they are really pushing so that the president could set precedent, if you will, and unilaterally raise the debt ceiling. And my fear is that there are so many people out there that don't understand this, that we could slip into the abyss of socialism. You write in your column here, Zach, and I want to get your response to that as well. But right now, to put the national debt into perspective, we have $31.46 trillion in national debt. That's $94,000 worth of debt burden to people that don't pay into the federal income tax. And then $247,000 for the people that do. This is insane, and this is unsustainable, and this is intentional, in my opinion, Zach.
Well, it's certainly unsustainable. I mean, just to emphasize, each American citizen, Carl, their share of the national debt is $94,000. That's just each citizen were to submit $94,000 to the federal government, it would pay off the national debt almost, because we're still incurring more debt today.
Sure.
Or really. But not everyone directly pays taxes. Now, I think taxes burden everyone directly or indirectly, but not everyone pays federal income taxes. And so if you look at who actually pays federal income taxes, if you distribute the national debt among those individuals, their share would be $247,000 per person that pays federal income taxes. And that's just mind-boggling. It's staggering. And as you said, it is certainly not sustainable.
You mentioned in your column, and you made mention of this already, but I just want to go back through it real quickly here. Basically, if you consider how consumers pay credit card bills, that's essentially what the government does, I guess, when they're paying down the debt, the debt limit or debt ceiling or what have you. But you say the government finances its excess spending through various mechanisms. Again, you spoke about this briefly, but mainly through issuance of debt instruments such as treasury notes, bills, and bonds. Why aren't they willing to do that this time around, in your opinion?
Well, they can't do it right now, Carl, because we've actually already hit the debt limit. The debt limit, it caps the aggregate amount of debt the federal government can incur. And so anytime you go to the bank or the Treasury Department website and you buy a Treasury bond, you're essentially buying debt from the United States government. You're essentially loaning the government money that they then have to repay you with interest. And so that's the way the government funds its excess spending. And we've hit the debt limit several months ago, really in early January. So technically right now, the government isn't supposed to borrow any more money above that limit. And that's why you hear talk about Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, and others saying they're taking extraordinary measures, that they're essentially using accounting gimmicks, shuffling money around to keep kind of the money flowing without exceeding that aggregate debt limit. And so right now, that's one of the worries, that these temporary measures can only last so long, and that eventually, if Janet Yellen's to be believed, by June 1st, the government will essentially be out of money.
So essentially, the United States of America has essentially maxed out our credit card. And you have a Republican Party that is saying, hey, listen, we're going to increase your debt ceiling an additional $1.5 trillion, but in return for giving you a higher limit on your credit card, so to speak, Zach, you're going to have to make some priority cuts so that we know that you can pay the bill. Is that essentially correct?
Yeah, more or less. Basically, they're asking to pair the raising of the credit card limit, as you were saying, with future spending cuts to make sure that you're not, in fact, insolvent at a future date. But this is as you were saying before, a very serious matter, and really, the United States is taking on what many view as unsustainable amounts of debt right now, and so this is certainly something that needs to happen to get the United States as a nation to be more fiscally responsible.
Will you speak to, you write in the column, before the Treasury can issue any debt, through Congress must first authorize an expenditure and appropriate money for it. You spoke on that. But this is because the Constitution places the power of the purse with Congress. You've mentioned that, but if you will, just stress to the audience, Zach, the importance of the power of the purse remaining with the Congress and closest to the people, as opposed to some wannabe dictator that wants to unilaterally decide what our debt should be, our debt limit should be, based upon his or her whims.
Well, remember, Carl, taxation without representation, that was one of the main issues in the American Revolution. They thought Parliament and the king were taxing them unfairly, that they did not have representation. And so this is something that stayed with the framers of our Constitution. They wanted to be sure that the people's elected representatives, the branch of government that was supposed to be closest to the American people, really retained primary authority for deciding how to tax them, how to spend their money, how to be in control of the United States fiscal affairs. And so because of that, they gave Congress the power of the purse. They basically said taxes can't be levied without Congress approving them. In fact, the House of Representatives, the house within Congress that's supposed to be closest to the people, that's where all taxation related bills have to originate. The founders basically said that the power of the purse, it's very powerful, and it's one of the fundamental checks they viewed as Congress having on the court system and the presidency. If they didn't like something that was happening, they could simply cut off the funding for it and use that as a very powerful carrot and a very powerful stick to get the executive to do what they wanted them to do. And so if this process for authorizing and appropriating money, if that is circumvented, that would really undermine a core tenet of our government, would undermine the separation of powers that the framers of our Constitution viewed as being so essential to our functioning government.
Guys, and I really want you to hear that point. I mean, this Constitution is of, for, and by the people. I think we are entering in unprecedented times in America, where it's not just this argument about the debt ceiling and the debt limit. It is what the left wants to do. And they want total control. They want the executive branch essentially to control everything, where Congress, or you, the people, don't have a say. So I want to make sure that we stress that. Do we have to be? Should we be frantic about the Republicans and Biden coming to, if they can't come to an agreement on time, essentially, Zach, won't we be able to still pay our essential bills, within the federal government? Won't we, what am I trying to ask here? We'll still be able to pay us for the essential roles of government, correct?
Well, look, I think everyone agrees the U.S. defaulting on its current debt is not good. That's
Right.
kind of the baseline everybody agrees on. In terms of what happens after that, we really are in uncharted territory. It's never happened before in our nation's history. If you listen to different people, they'll tell you different things. But you are right, Carl. The United States will still have revenue coming in. Tax receipts will still be coming into the Treasury. And so then the question becomes, how do those receipts come in? How do they get prioritized in terms of making payments? And basically what's happening right now, these extraordinary measures that Janet Yellen talks about, the members of Congress talk about, that's essentially the prioritization that the Congress, the president, others have agreed on. This is how the bill should get paid first if we run out of money, if we can't raise any more debt. And so the question is, what happens if we run out of money to even meet these kind of prioritization schedules that we've all already agreed on?
Right.
And so it's really an open question of what happens theoretically. We should still have money to be able to pay some of our bills, but how that prioritization works, how that process looks, it's very much an open question because there really is no precedent dealing with this issue.
And to put it in layman's terms, I definitely don't want to destroy our credit score, if you will, the
Right.
United States credit score. But at the same time, I do believe and understand, and correct me if I'm wrong. Social Security, all of the entitlements, Social Security, Medicaid, all of this stuff will be funded. Our military will be funded. Essential jobs of the government will be funded. Not necessarily non-essential jobs. So, in essence, what the federal government would have to do, were we to come to a debt ceiling crisis, quote unquote, the government would have to look around. The House, the executive branch, the Treasury Department would have to say, "Oh my God, we have to prioritize our spending now." I don't. You know what I mean? I don't want to minimize it, but essentially, isn't that what happens?
It is to some degree, although, there are really two things that could happen. There are two different arguments out there right now. One is essentially what you're saying, that Janet Yellen, the Treasury Department, the president, they'd have to pick and choose what bills to pay essentially and what bills to put off until a later date. There's also an argument, some have said, that the government could just stop paying all its bills and just hold everything until the spigot starts flowing again. Now, there are obviously problems with that approach as well, but I think it does highlight kind of the unprecedented situation we're in and the fact that there really is no, legal or just, factual precedent for this scenario.
Okay, let's get into Crazyville with the time that we have remaining here, Zach. I am convinced that the Democrat Party has gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs under the leadership of Joseph R. Biden and the Biden administration. I frankly believe, just my opinion, that his staff and not he is running the federal government. But you write about this idiocy of invoking the 14th Amendment in order for Biden to literally take the power of the purse from the Congress and use it to unilaterally spend. Let me just write what you wrote. Read what you wrote. More perniciously, some have argued that the Constitution itself prohibits the debt ceiling. Those arguments come in different flavors, but most are based on Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, by the way, guys, has to do with slavery and birthright citizenship. It's insane, but here's what it says. The validity, or going back to Zack Smith's column here, check it out at thedailysignal.com. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, this is Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection, there's that famous word, or rebellion, shall not be questioned, but neither the U.S. nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. And you write the key phrase for those arguments is that, quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned, close quote. So, Zack Smith, are you to tell me that the president of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, is literally arguing that the Constitution gives him the right to unilaterally spend, going back to the 14th Amendment, where we were trying to make sure, as you write about, that Confederate soldiers or people from the South wouldn't try to pay off their debt after the Civil War or debt alone, instead of Northern Union soldiers' debt, basically. This is insane.
It is, Carl. And look, it's interesting because many on the left, particularly the far left, are pushing, Joe Biden and his administration to invoke this absurd 14th Amendment argument. The Biden administration itself has been somewhat cagey about whether or not they'll actually invoke it. I suspect if they go to the constitutional lawyers at the Justice Department, the Office of Legal Counsel, we haven't seen any opinion they have written on this particular issue. I suspect if they have looked at it, I hope they would come to the same conclusion that I've come to and many other legal commentators have come to as well, that this is really a silly argument more than anything else. But as you mentioned, I think it's important to understand the purpose of this amendment. It was originally designed after the Civil War to make sure that basically Northern debts would remain valid and that Southern debts wouldn't be, essentially put in their place and paid off instead of the Northern debts. This was a very real concern as Southern states were being readmitted to the Union. And so this was constitutionalized. It was put into the Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. But I think it's also important to recognize, Carl, that if we were to hit the debt ceiling and the payments to these debts were, and this is theoretical, were to temporarily stop, that doesn't really change the underlying validity of the debt itself. The debt is still good. You're just having a payment issue about when payments can resume. And so because the underlying debt is still good, no one's suggesting that Congress is repudiating the debt or saying we don't have to pay this debt anymore. They're just trying to figure out when and how they can make payments. That really cuts to the core of Section 5 of the 14th Amendment because the debt itself isn't being questioned. And so just on that alone, it's really hard to see how you could have a violation of Section 5 of the 14th Amendment if the debt itself isn't being questioned. But one more quick point I'll make is if Joe Biden or any other president were to pursue this path, this would really be a fundamental violation of the separation of powers, like we were talking about earlier. It would essentially allow the president not only to raise the debt ceiling, but really using the same logic, would allow him to spend money in any way for any purpose that he deems fit. And that is not what the framers of our Constitution envisioned, and it really would set a very dangerous precedent for us going forward.
Yeah, and honestly, the sad part is, at least in my opinion, Zach, is I don't think the left cares. This isn't the first time they tried it, as you wrote about. They tried this under Obama. They wanted to mint a coin, and they've discussed that as well, a platinum coin worth, $1 trillion or some nonsense like that. They tried this 14th Amendment argument under the Obama administration. So this is Obama 3.0, if you will. So this is nothing new. Zach, how do we... let's long term, how do we fix this debt limit, debt ceiling issue where this isn't an issue every single year? Is it like we have in Florida where basically, listen, this is our annual budget. That's it. And let me couple that with, how does Congress take back the power completely of the purse strings instead of delegating some of their powers and constitutional duties, frankly, out to the Treasury Secretary?
Well, I think the first thing to do is, Carl, is Congress has to get spending under control. That's the best way to avoid the debt ceiling fight is to stop spending as much. But I think it is important because really, if we take the 40,000 foot view, the arguments being made now really go beyond this specific debt limit fight. You're really seeing a push to do away with the debt limit. There have been arguments that very few other countries have debt limits, and so I think you're going to start hearing more of those types of arguments. And so to your point, how does Congress retain control over spending in addition to authorizing and appropriating money for certain things? The debt limit is an important part of Congress's ability to maintain control of the purse strings. And so as we continue this conversation, as more people argue that the debt ceiling should be abolished, I think it's important to keep in mind that the only reason we're having this conversation now about spending, whether spending should be reduced, and that sort of thing, is because a debt limit is in place and it forces Congress to do their jobs and make these very difficult decisions. And to me, that is a good thing because that is how the framers of our Constitution intended it to be, for Congress to debate these very important, very difficult policy issues and come to a decision on them.
All right. Well, Zack Smith, we'll leave it there for now. We'll probably be contacting you to see if you can spare some time to come on to the Officer Tatum show and break this down. I'd really love the national audience to hear it as well, because I really think it is time for the Republicans to stand strong and lay down the law. I frankly don't even like raising the debt ceiling. But I think they're being conciliatory. I think they're doing what they can, given the fact that the Republicans don't run the Senate, and all they're asking for is for some fiscal sanity in exchange, and it drives me nuts. And this message has to get out that the president cannot be allowed to unilaterally raise the debt limit of the United States and just spend our credit card, so to speak, any way he or she wants. I mean, every Democrat or Republican should be able to agree on that, but I'm not even sure they understand the argument, Zach, because it's not being told.
Right. Well, thank you for having me on, Carl. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because it really is a very important issue. It goes to the core issues of separation of powers, how our government should function. And really, keeping a focus on this is very important because I suspect, as the time crunch gets shorter, as we run up against this June 1st deadline, you'll start hearing a bigger and bigger push for Joe Biden to invoke this 14th Amendment argument. And again, that'd be a very bad, very dangerous thing for our country.
Zach, let me just close this out. If you'll just sit tight there so that we can make sure we have everything uploaded, I'd appreciate it. For those of you out there listening, guys, I appreciate you tuning in to the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast. We're on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, thecarljacksonshow.com, our Rumble channel. Rate, review, and please give us a 5 there, and just share the podcast on YouTube and Rumble. That'll help us move up the charts on all things social media. You can find me at The Carl Jackson Show, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, True Social, Getter, you name it. Zack Smith is on Twitter at Smith at TZ Smith, or Zack Smith, I'm sorry, at TZ Smith, or at TZ Smith. I'm sorry, Zach, at TZ Smith. You can find him on Twitter, or check out his columns at the Daily Signal. He really does a great job there, breaking down, constitutional law, if you will, and making things digestible for the everyday working American. So we really do appreciate them. Guys, until next time, do not grow weary doing good. God bless you.
Thanks so much.